I'm Chip Brewster, filling in for Basil John of Nexstar's Washington Bureau. These are the headlines out of the nation's capital for Tuesday, May 26th. Negotiations to end the war with Iran are continuing despite a new round of American strikes on Iranian targets. The U.S. and Iran agreed to a ceasefire on April 8th, and the Trump administration says an agreement to permanently end the war is still possible. NewsNation Washington correspondent Gabrielle Caracciolo has the latest.
The U.S. military says these were self-defense strikes conducted in southern Iran Monday. Iran's foreign ministry says they constitute a ceasefire violation. They're vowing not to leave an act of aggression unanswered.
It's either going to be a good deal or there isn't going to be one.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio says reaching a deal with Iran will take time, as the president says talks are proceeding nicely.
I think there's strong alignment and agreement on what a preliminary draft should look like. I think that, like anything with something like this, it's going to take a couple days to settle on, even down to the disagreements over a word, sentence. So we'll have to work through that.
According to a senior Trump administration official, the potential deal would reopen the Strait of Hormuz and force Iran to give up its stockpile of enriched uranium, which President Trump says would be destroyed. That process would be worked out over a 60-day extension of the current ceasefire.
The straits have to be open. They're going to be open one way or the other. So they need to be open. What's happening there is unlawful. It's illegal. It's unsustainable for the world.
On Truth Social, President Trump also said any agreement reached should mandate several Middle Eastern countries, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Pakistan, join the Abraham Accords. The agreements were signed in 2020 under the first Trump administration to try and improve relations between Israel and neighboring countries. And President Trump is set to make a rare trip to Camp David tomorrow to convene his cabinet. Gabrielle Caracciolo, NewsNation, Washington.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio spent the weekend overseas talking with foreign leaders. The Iran war was a common topic in those meetings. Here's what he told reporters as he was leaving India.
Well, the straits have to be open. They're going to be open one way or the other. So they need to be open. What's happening there is unlawful. It's illegal. It's unsustainable for the world. It's unacceptable. I don't know of any country in the world that does it. The Russians are not in favor of a tolling system. The Chinese are not in favor of a tolling system. I mean, there's no country in the world that's in favor of a tolling system except the regime in Iran. So that's not acceptable. That cannot happen. The straits need to be open, unimpeded, without tolls, and obviously that needs to happen immediately as soon as anything's agreed to.
Did you ask about Nicole Lavrov? He said in the readout that he's trying to encourage the U.S. to withdraw staff from Kyiv. Did you talk to him?
Well, they sent a notice to all the embassies, and I think he was just calling to personally tell me. They told all the embassies to Kyiv's going to be a very dangerous place. Kyiv's been a very dangerous place now for a number of years. Look, the danger in all of these wars as they continue and they go on is that they always have the threat of escalation, of spreading into something new. So I spoke to him yesterday about that and a couple other topics, and obviously Putin had asked him to call me to relay the message directly to the president, which I did, but obviously we had already seen that it was sent out to all the diplomatic facilities. And I said, right now there is no active, scheduled negotiations ongoing with Ukraine, but the U.S. is always prepared to play a constructive and helpful role if that opportunity presents itself.
What about these big Russian strikes in Kyiv? Some of the biggest, yeah.
Well, this is what happens with these wars. I mean, they just continue to escalate. There's a big strike coming one way, a bigger strike coming back, and that's how these things unravel and keep going. And it's why the war needs to come to an end. And look, every time you see these big strikes from one side or the other, it's a reminder of why this is a terrible war that's now gone on longer than the Second World War, and it needs to come to an end. And the U.S. stands ready and prepared to help do whatever we can to help facilitate the end of this war. Hopefully the opportunity will present itself at some point that we can play that role again.
Back in Iran, I mean, the talks in Qatar.
No one else has questions? Well, I know you guys don't. Go ahead.
The talks in Qatar, is the U.S. going to have any sort of representation there? How are you getting the message through?
Well, look, I think our position is well stated. The president had a very important, I think, historic call just a couple days ago with a number of leaders from the region. I think there's strong alignment and agreement on what a preliminary draft should look like. I think that, like anything with something like this, it's going to take a couple days to settle on, even down to the disagreements over a word, sentence. So we'll have to work through that. If there's going to be a deal, we're going to have to work through that. But this is, it's either going to be a good deal or there isn't going to be one.
And now for a headline that is literally out of this world. NASA is unveiling plans for the future of the moon. Today, NASA Chief Jared Isaacman laid out plans to go back to the moon and stay permanently. NASA will be sending astronauts on increasingly difficult missions to explore more of the moon in preparation for the first human mission to Mars.
In the time since Artemis 2, we have been extremely active. We've been reviewing feedback from the ignition event, speaking to industry, addressing supply chain challenges, having the tough conversations with those failing to meet expectations, and offering NASA's assistance to solve problems and doing the other hard things that should be expected of the world's most accomplished space agency. We are working alongside our lunar lander providers, preparing for Artemis 3 crew announcement and getting ready to begin stacking Artemis 3 this summer with a target launch in mid-2027. Across the agency, our astronauts, controllers, and principal investigators have been completing great science on the International Space Station. We've been flying more X-planes. We've been formulating the next X-planes. We've been getting ready for the Nancy Grace Roman telescope, ready to launch this summer, and welcoming, again, a new deputy administrator with Matt Anderson. On May 22nd, in a workforce note, alongside a series of directives, I announced investments in the NASA organization into our centers to meet the urgent priorities outlined in the National Space Policy, focus resources on the most pressing objectives, strengthen and empower the workforce and agency leadership. And today, May 26, we're very pleased to update you on some of our progress. America is returning to the moon. We are working alongside our many international and commercial partners to leverage the incredible capabilities from commercial industry to build a moon base. For all we hope to accomplish in this endeavor, what we are embarking upon is extremely challenging, and we know so little from what is a combined 80 hours of lunar astronaut EVA time across the Apollo missions, and that was more than a half century ago. So we are not jumping right into the glass dome moon base as a service. As we announced during the ignition event, we intend to take an iterative approach, sending a demand signal to industry for a lot of landers and rovers and tech demonstrations and all the scientific payloads these missions can accommodate. We are leveraging the NASA playbook from the 1960s, figuring out what works and what doesn't in this epic science of survival, because the moon base is as beautiful as it is hostile. In sunlight, the surface can heat to over 250 degrees. In darkness, it can drop well below minus 200. In the permanently shaded craters, areas of great interest that have been untouched by sunlight for millions, even billions of years, temperatures can fall well below minus 400 degrees. There is no atmosphere to moderate these extremes, no protection from radiation and solar particle events, and the surface is exposed to meteorite impacts, including the kind of light flashes the Artemis 2 crew observed from orbit. Recognizing this reality, I'm often asked why we send our astronauts into such harsh and dangerous and unforgiving environment of space or the lunar surface, and at such great cost. And we go for the technology we will pioneer to get there, the science and all that we will learn that will make life better here on Earth, to advance humankind on this great adventure, to inspire the next generation to do it better than we can, and to be very clear, to master the skills for where we will inevitably go next.
And that was just part of that press conference, one that I actually had the chance to witness, and there were quite a few updates. Look for those on your local Nexstar station website. News closer to home, by that I mean Earth. A bystander who was shot when a gunman opened fire at a U.S. Secret Service outside the White House on Saturday has non-life-threatening injuries, the agency says. The gunman died after he approached agents and shot at them just outside the White House security perimeter. Court records show the suspect, 21-year-old Nasir Best, had also tried to get past White House security last summer. Dave Laval with DC News Now talked with witnesses to the shooting.
Just kind of crazy to be here the next day, really.
Peter Vorbach looks at the damage to the history shop. He described being in a crosswalk when shots rang out Saturday night.
I was headed down to the Washington Monument. I hear these loud gunshots, and I look up and I see a person who I had noticed before walking down the street, and he was firing. Once I put two and two together, I immediately ran and heard a barrage of gunfire.
We counted more than a dozen bullet holes, including several in the building next door to the White House shop, where the Irish Embassy is located. Cheryl Roberts co-chaperoned a school field trip from Houston, Texas.
This was very scary, and I'm glad that we were not here when this happened.
The Associated Press reports Bess suffered from mental problems and had been ordered to stay away from the White House in August 2025, following his arrest near there a month earlier. Retired Secret Service agent Jeff James says investigators are searching for clues about the suspect.
Well, at this time, they've probably already been through the suspect's home, his social media, any writings that they could find. It seems like we always find some kind of diary or manifesto after events like this.
No Secret Service officers received any injuries during the attack. Along Pennsylvania Avenue in Northwest, Dave Laval, DC News Now.
More of today's DC headlines when we return. Welcome back. Vice President J.D. Vance has convened another meeting of his anti-fraud task force. This time, he brought in attorneys general from around the country to participate. He said fighting fraud across the country should be a bipartisan partnership between states and the federal government.
One of the things we've realized in combating fraud is that the resources of the federal government, while vast, can be supplemented and aided by a lot of the people who know best what's happening in their states, which is the attorneys general represented here today. And they have a lot of legal resources. They have a lot of prosecutorial resources. And of course, they have the desire to prevent fraud as much as we do. And so I appreciate these leaders for being here because we're going to work together, state and federal government, to try to combat fraud. I'm particularly gratified here that this is not a partisan effort. I believe we have a couple of representatives from the attorney generals in Connecticut and Oregon. And as I've said repeatedly, this should not be a partisan effort. Everybody should care about fraud. Everybody should care about rooting out fraud. Everybody should care about saving the American taxpayers' money. And importantly, everybody should care about actually protecting the programs that only work and are only properly funded if the money funding those programs isn't being stolen by fraudsters. So let me just recap for the benefit of our friends of the media. In just 2 months, we exposed billions of dollars in benefits that have been stolen from the American people. We've referred over $22 billion in fraudulent small business loans back to the Treasury for collection. We deferred more than $1.3 billion in fraudulent Medicaid reimbursements that were coming from various states, particularly California. We put a 6-month hold on enrollments for new hospice and home health care providers because so many of the newer hospice providers were not actually providing hospice services, but were just focused on fraud. So we're going to cut that out for a little bit and try to get to a place where we can actually certify that the people providing hospice services are actually providing those very necessary and important services. We've recovered taxpayer funds from the $135 billion stolen after the floodgates were open in the immediate aftermath of COVID. We have found $6.3 billion in suspected fraudulent government contracts, which were mostly awarded during the last administration, and that has stopped. And finally, we've blocked $60 million in student aid fraud that should have gone to young people trying to get an education, but instead we're going to fraudsters. And I think the theme here of the anti-fraud task force up to this point has really been that we're protecting two classes of victims here. We're protecting the American taxpayers who shouldn't have their money stolen by fraudsters. And of course, we're protecting the people who need these services. Fraud is not a victimless crime. This is not somebody gets to make some money for violating the law, and otherwise it's not a big deal.
Questions continue to swirl around President Trump's health and age. The president turns 80 next month and is the second oldest president in U.S. history, with only former President Joe Biden being older. NewsNation Washington correspondent Hannah Brandt reports the latest on the president's health.
President Trump spent the morning here at Walter Reed Medical Center for his annual medical and dental assessments. The White House says this is part of his regular preventative health care, but the president is set to turn 80 years old next month, and some are raising questions about his health. This was the president's fourth publicly disclosed medical exam in this second term. And a White House official does tell me they're planning to share a readout from the day's exam, but it'll be up to them to choose exactly what they do want to share. That's always been the case. There's no law requiring presidents to disclose info about their medical records. But this does come as age is increasingly in the spotlight in politics. Obviously, former President Joe Biden was pushed to drop out of the 2024 race over concerns about his age. stage. President Trump and the White House have repeatedly insisted his health is exceptional. We often hear the president at rallies and events saying he's aced cognitive exams. But in recent months, there have been some specific concerns raised about President Trump. For one, there's the visible bruising you can see on his hands. The White House says that's because of frequent handshaking combined with regular aspirin use. There's also sometimes swelling that you can see in his ankles. The White House has attributed that to a common vein condition that the president was previously diagnosed with. But critics also point to moments where President Trump appears to be closing his eyes for long periods of time at official public events, and moments where they argue he's rambling off topic. And a Washington Post ABC News Ipsos poll back in April did find only 40% of Americans say President Trump has the necessary mental sharpness. That's down from 47% last fall. And only 44% believe he has the physical health needed for this office, also a drop. But Trump administration officials and supporters dismiss those health concerns. One of the main things they point to is his very busy schedule. He's often traveling. He frequently interacts with the press, including many of those interactions on camera. At Walter Reed, Hannah Brandt, News Nation.
Now for one more quick break and then a few more stories on the other side, including what exactly is being built on the White House's South Lawn. We'll be right back. Welcome back to DC Daily. Chip Brewster here, not Basil John. There's a buzz around Washington, D.C. The best young spellers have descended on the nation's capital for the Scripps National Spelling Bee this week. It's a tradition dating back more than 100 years, with some new sights this year. Our Rashad Hudson has a look at some of this year's competitors.
After 15 years away, the National Spelling Bee is back in Washington, D.C. Nearly 250 spellers, all chasing one goal, and that's to take home one of these.
It means everything. I'm from a very small town, and not many people there stand out. But I've managed to figure it out, and I'm thankful that I can represent my town here in Lawrence County in Southeast Ohio.
What would a win mean for you?
It'd mean everything. It'd be so awesome that I accomplished something that no one from my region has probably ever accomplished.
I feel honored to be here again for the second time again this year.
Oh, wow. And what did you learn from your first time here versus this time?
I learned that the nationals is a whole different level than regionals, and that helped me a lot with my preparation leading up to this year.
And how did you prepare to be here?
I worked on a lot of different words to expand my base, and I also worked on language patterns and roots, so I'd be able to figure out words that I didn't already know.
Do you have a favorite type of words or favorite word to spell?
French words are fun to spell, but they can also be a bit annoying because there's so many hidden letters.
I think it's really exciting. I'm the first ever from my school, which is cool, and I'm just really excited to get out there.
Do you have a favorite type of words or a favorite word to spell?
I'm Italian. I don't know, I just think Italian words are fun. Yeah.
Why is that?
There's just kind of like a vibe to them. I don't know.
What advice do you have for people? This is your first time. What advice do you have to other students that may want to get involved in the spelling bee?
I think a lot of people just get nervous up there, which can really mess up all your studying. Just stay as calm as possible. That really helps a lot.
It's super awesome. I've always watched the bee, it's super amazing competition. And I never thought that I would be here competing, but it's really cool.
Walk me through your process in terms of getting here, studying. What was that like?
So the regional bee, the Chicago bee, was in March. And after I won that, I needed to really crank up my spelling study. So I do about an hour or 2 hours of study a day. I study roots, linguistic patterns, and then sometimes I just look at the words, rote memorization. And I really need to drill those words, those patterns in my head.
Do you have a favorite type of words?
Favorite type of words? So I really like easy words if I'm spelling, but the most interesting words I think are German words. They're hard to spell, but they sound so fun. Sprechstimme, Bewusstseinslage, those are some of the ones that people have gotten, and they're fun.
There's a lot of nerves, but everyone's really kind, and I love meeting new friends here and getting all those signatures in our
You're on a much different time zone. How different is it, even being on that time zone? How is that playing a role in the spelling bee for you, in your preparation?
Well, I think my preparation, well, I've been staying up later to study, but I've been having to get up earlier too. But I don't really feel as much, except that sometimes I'm kind of grumpy.
Talk to me about your preparation. What did you do to get here to the National Spelling Bee?
So first I studied the 4,000 word list that we were provided at school, and that was the first 2 rounds we just had and most of the regional spelling bee. But I also learned some language rules, and I had spelling classes, and I went through a few books to assist me in this competition.
For one speller, the journey ends with a trophy. Over the next few days, the bee will continue, and on Thursday night, a champion will be crowned. Reporting from Constitution Hall, I'm Rashad Hudson.
Good luck to all the young competitors out there. There's a couple other competitors we want to talk about, and it involves this thing. Construction underway at the White House for the UFC Freedom 250 fight happening next month. Crews have begun work on the temporary arena on the south lawn of the White House. The president says the setup will have enough space to hold 4,500 fans, primarily a mix of military members and guests invited by the White House and the UFC. Ben Dennis of DC News Now shows us the construction and some of the local reaction.
Curiosity and cell phone cameras.
I was shocked. It's never been like this.
Centered on a first-of-its-kind fight night at the White House.
I'm not a fan of the aesthetic, but I'm a fan of the intensity of the celebration.
Locals and visitors getting a first physical look ahead of UFC Freedom 250 after renderings were released this weekend, showing plans for a temporary arena on the South Lawn. Crews now assembling major steel structures to surround the fighters. No football, no baseball, no soccer. Apparently, just guys fighting each other.
Yeah, same as the politics right now.
Flag Day, June 14th, is the target date for the event, which also happens to be President Trump's 80th birthday. National Park Service records show event setup and teardown stretches from May 20th through late June, underscoring the size of the transformation. The Washington Post reports roughly 4,000 spectators are expected near the secured South Lawn viewing area. More people expected to gather in separate viewing areas.
I think it's pretty cool, though. The public loves that.
I think it is strange. It is unprecedented. It is historic.
Reuters reports UFC leadership says the company is expected to cover major event costs, including cleanup. And with less than 3 weeks before fight night, some are wondering whether to be on site when the first punches are thrown.
Once in a lifetime.
And that'll do it for today's DC Daily. I'm Chip Brewster. We do expect Basil John to be back in tomorrow. Until the next time you see me, though, take care.